He told me the house was too big for one person. He said it on a Sunday afternoon in October, standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee he had poured without asking. He looked around at the counters, at the window above the sink, at the shelf where Carol kept her cookbooks, the ones she arranged by color because she said it made the kitchen feel like a painting, and he said, "Frank, honestly, what do you even do with all this space?" I looked at him. I did not answer right away. His name is Derek. He is 34 years old. He married my daughter Stephanie 6 years ago in a ceremony in the backyard of this house, under the oak tree that I planted the summer Stephanie was born. I built the arbor myself. I strung the lights. Carol sat in the front row in a blue dress and cried before the ceremony even started because she said she always cried when things were too beautiful to hold. Carol died 19 months before Derek stood in my kitchen and told me my house was too big. I said, "I manage fine." He nodded in the way that people nod when they are not listening. Then he said, "Stephanie wanted to talk to me about something." Then he called her name. She came in from the living room already holding her hands together in front of her, which is what she does when she is about to say something she has rehearsed. She said they were thinking about their future. She said the rent on their apartment had gone up again. She said it made financial sense to consolidate. I knew what she meant. I said, "You want to move in here?" She said yes. She said it would be good for all of us. She said I wouldn't be alone anymore. She said they could help with the yard, with the maintenance, with the groceries. I looked at my daughter, and I thought about how much she looks like her mother. The same eyes. The same way of tilting her head slightly when she is hoping you will agree with her. Carol used to do that. Carol used to tilt her head and smile, and I would agree to almost anything, because how could I not? I said I would think about it. I did think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I thought about the silence in the house in the mornings, which I had learned to live with, but which I had not learned to like. I thought about Thanksgiving the year before, when I had sat at this table alone for the first time in 41 years and eaten a meal I had no appetite for. I thought about Stephanie when she was 8 years old, sitting right there at that counter doing her homework while Carol made dinner, and the way the light used to come through that window and sit on both of them, like something I was not allowed to name. I said yes. I want you to understand, friends, that I said yes because I love my daughter. Not because of what Derek said about the space, not because of the maintenance, or the yard, or the groceries. I said yes because she is my daughter and this was her home, and I thought that meant something to her. They moved in on a Saturday in November. By the following Wednesday, Stephanie had reorganized the pantry. I came downstairs that morning to make coffee and found that the shelf where Carol kept the canned tomatoes, always on the second shelf, left side, because she said that was the logical place, had been emptied and reorganized. The tomatoes were somewhere else. The pasta was somewhere else. The spices that Carol had arranged alphabetically in 2019 because she said she was tired of searching for the paprika had been moved into a drawer I didn't know we were using for spices. I stood in the pantry for a long moment. I did not say anything that morning. The following week, the living room furniture had shifted. The armchair that Carol had picked out from a shop in Asheville, the blue-gray one she called the reading chair because she spent every Sunday morning in it with her tea and her book, had been moved to the corner by the door. In its place was a new piece, something modern, something that did not belong in this house. I asked Stephanie about it. She said the layout worked better for traffic flow. She said the old arrangement was a little cramped. She smiled when she said it. I thought about a lot of things in that moment. I kept most of them to myself. Derek, in those first weeks, was what I would call expansive. He had opinions about the thermostat. He had opinions about which television service we should be using and why the one I had was outdated. He had opinions about the driveway, the gutters, the brand of dish soap near the sink. He shared these opinions freely and often. He did not ask questions. He made statements. One evening, he told me I should think about downsizing. He said some of the senior communities near Greenville had very nice amenities. He said a lot of people his parents' age were making that move. He said it with the tone of someone doing a favor. I said, "I'm 67, Derek. I cut my own firewood." He laughed. He thought I was joking. I was not joking. By December, I had started to notice a pattern. Things would disappear and reappear in different places. My tools in the garage, which I kept on a pegboard, organized exactly the way my father taught me every tool, with a labeled outline so you always knew where it lived, had been rearranged. Derek said he needed to access the shelves, and the pegboard was in the way. He said he had put everything in a bin. My father built that pegboard. He built it in 1987 and gave it to me when Carol and I bought this house. I had never told Derek that. I did not tell him that day either. I filed it. The word for what I was doing is documenting. I started keeping a small notebook. I wrote down dates and what had happened. Furniture moved, tools relocated, comments made, thermostat adjusted without asking. Guest room referred to once as the office. My office referred to once as that extra room. I am a retired civil engineer. I spent 33 years managing infrastructure projects in 3 states. If you want to understand how I think, you should know that. I do not react to problems. I identify them, I assess them, and I plan a response. I had been doing this since November. By January, I was ready to make a phone call. The person I called is named Gerald. Gerald has been my attorney for 22 years. I met him when I was managing the county drainage project in 2003, and he was handling an easement dispute for a landowner on the south side. He is methodical. He does not waste words. When I explained the situation to him, he asked me 2 questions. He said, "Is your name the only name on the deed?" I said yes. He said, "Have you put anything in writing that could be interpreted as a transfer of any interest in the property?" I said no. He said, "Then we have clarity." He told me what my options were. He explained what a formal notice of termination of a month-to-month tenancy looked like. He told me the statutory notice period in South Carolina. He told me what would need to be served and how. I thanked him. I told him I wasn't ready to act yet. I told him I wanted to see if things resolved on their own. He said, "Frank, in my experience, these things do not resolve on their own." He was right. I knew he was right when he said it, but Stephanie is my daughter, and I needed to be sure I had given her every reasonable opportunity before I did what I was going to do. That is not weakness. That is fairness. In February, Derek came to me with a document. He did not call it a document. He called it something we all put together to make the living situation smoother. It was 2 pages, printed, with a header that said, "Household Agreement." It had sections. There was a section about shared expenses. There was a section about use of common areas. There was a section about guests, which stated that overnight guests required 48 hours advance notice from any party. Any party. I want you to understand, friends, what that meant. That meant that I, in my own home, in the house I purchased in 1994, in the house where I raised my daughter, in the house where my wife lived and cooked and read in her chair on Sunday mornings and died in the back bedroom on a Thursday in May, I would need to give 48 hours notice before having a guest sleep over. There was also a section about quiet hours. I read the document. I read every word of it. Derek was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Stephanie was standing near the counter. They were both watching me. I set the document down. I said, "I appreciate you putting this together." Derek started to say something. I held up one hand. I said, "Before we talk about this, I need you to do me a favor. There's a package I'm expecting, and I haven't checked the mail yet today. Would you mind walking out and grabbing it from the box?" Derek looked at Stephanie. Stephanie looked at Derek. Derek said, "Right now?" I said yes. I said I'd been waiting on it, and I wanted to make sure it hadn't been sitting out in the cold. He pushed back from the table. He went to get his jacket. He went outside. "I want to tell you what was in that mailbox." Gerald had prepared a formal notice of termination. It was addressed to both Derek Allen Marsh and Stephanie Carol Marsh. Yes, she took his last name, but her middle name is Carol. She has always been Stephanie Carol. That was her grandmother's name first, and then it became a middle name we gave her because some things deserve to carry forward. The notice stated that their occupancy of the premises at 114 Weston Mill Road, Taylors, South Carolina, was hereby terminated, that they had 30 days from the date of service to vacate the property, and that failure to vacate would result in legal proceedings. It had been delivered that morning by a process server. Signed for, documented. Gerald doesn't make mistakes about things like that. Derek came back inside, holding the envelope. He looked at the return address. He looked at me. He said, "Frank, what is this?" It was not a question. His voice had changed. The expansiveness was gone. I said, "It's what it looks like." He said, "You're evicting us." I said, I'm exercising my legal right to terminate a month-to-month tenancy. That's what Gerald would tell you to call it. Stephanie had come into the kitchen. She was looking at the envelope. Then she looked at me. Her eyes did that thing, the Carol thing, the tilt. Except this time it wasn't hopeful. It was something I hadn't seen on her face before. Something between disbelief and the beginning of understanding. She said, "Dad." I said, "Sit down, sweetheart. Both of you." They sat. I remained standing for a moment, and then I sat too, because this was not a moment for theater. This was a conversation I had needed to have with my daughter since November, and I intended to have it. I said, "Stephanie, I love you. That has not changed, and it will not change. But I need to tell you what the last 3 months have been like for me, and I need you to actually hear it." I told her about the pantry. I told her about Carol's cookbooks. I told her about the armchair. I told her about the pegboard my father built that was now in a bin in the corner of the garage. I told her about the comment Derek made about the senior communities near Greenville. I told her about the thermostat and the dish soap and the phrase, "that extra room," being used to describe my office. I told her that this house is not just a building. I told her that it is 40 years of a life I built with her mother, and that her mother is everywhere in it, and that every time something was moved or rearranged or replaced without asking, it was not an inconvenience to me. It was a subtraction. Stephanie was crying by the time I finished. I expected that. What I did not expect was what she said next. She said, "I didn't know he moved the chair." I looked at her. She said, "I was at work. He told me you said it was fine." There was a long silence in that kitchen. Derek was very still. Stephanie looked at her husband. It was a look I recognized in the way you recognize weather. You don't need a forecast. You can just feel what's coming. I said, "The notice stands. 30 days. Derek started to speak. I said his name once, quietly, the way you say a word when you mean it, to end a conversation rather than start one. He stopped. I said, "I want to be fair. 30 days is the legal minimum. I will give you 60. That gives you time to find something that works. I will help Stephanie move if she needs it. This is not about pushing my daughter out of her home. This is about making clear that this is my home, and it will remain so." I slid the household agreement across the table toward Derek. I said, "I won't be needing this." He took it. They went upstairs. I could hear them talking, then not talking. Then Stephanie came back down alone. She sat at the table across from me. She looked like she had been wrung out. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I know." She said, "I should have paid more attention. I should have noticed what was happening." I said, "You are noticing now." She was quiet. Then she said, "Are we okay?" I said, "We are always going to be okay. You are my daughter. But you cannot bring someone into my home who treats it like a transition property. You understand that?" She nodded. I said, "Your mother's chair goes back where it belongs before the end of the week." She actually smiled at that. A real one. The Carol one. I want to tell you something, friends, because I think some of you may be living something like this right now. Or you have lived it. Or you are watching someone you love live it and you don't know what to say to them. This house at 114 Weston Mill Road is mine. Not in an angry way. Not in a way that means I hold it over anyone. I mean it in the way that you mean something when it is true and documented and recorded at the Greenville County Register of Deeds in a folder that also contains the survey and the title insurance and the original purchase agreement from 1994 and a property tax statement in my name paid, current through the end of the year. I mean it in the way that Carol meant it when she planted the rosebushes along the back fence in 2011 and said she was planting them for the bees, and I knew she was also planting them because she intended to be here long enough to watch them establish. She did not get as long as she intended, but the rosebushes are still there. I have kept them. That is not nothing. Derek found an apartment in March, a 2-bedroom on the east side of Greenville. Stephanie went with him. I helped her carry boxes. I did not help Derek carry boxes. He did not ask me to. On the last day, Stephanie came through the house one more time. She walked through every room slowly. She stood in the kitchen for a while. She stood in front of Carol's bookshelf. She ran her fingers along the spines. She said, "I forgot how much she loved cookbooks." I said, "She never followed a recipe exactly. She said they were more like suggestions." Stephanie laughed. I had not heard her laugh like that in months. It sounded like the house remembering something. She hugged me at the door. She held on for longer than she usually does. I let her. After she left, I stood in the kitchen. I made coffee. I put the spices back in alphabetical order. I moved Carol's chair back to its place by the window, where the morning light comes in. I sat in it for a while. It is too small for me, that chair. Carol was smaller than I am, and she bought it for herself, and I always sat in the larger one across from it. But I sat in it anyway. The rosebushes are going to bloom early this year. I checked them last week, and there is already new growth on the canes. Carol would have said that was a good sign. She would have said the bees know something we don't. I think she was probably right about that. The deed to this house is in the second drawer of my desk, in a manila envelope with the word property written on it in Carol's handwriting. She labeled it in 2016 when we reorganized the files. I have not changed the label. I don't intend to. Some things belong exactly where they are,